Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name's Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week we're gonna do a little mini series here that we're calling Forgotten Games. And this is the first one.
This is the first one, and this is not going to be we're going to do these whenever we feel like it. Whenever we find a forgotten game or a forgotten franchise. This was recommended on Discord, and I'm super stoked to talk about the game because I thought I'd never heard of it. And then I looked at the box art and I'm like, wait a second, I had this game. I just tried it as a kid and didn't understand what was going on and stopped playing it. But that game is StarTropics is the name of the game and the series. And there's StarTropics I and StarTropics II, although StarTropics II is called Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics II, but we'll get into that being confusing later. My sources for the episode, though, are Wikipedia, as always, to get started. But then there's a StarTropics wiki that I used, both from Nintendo and from Heroic Wikis or whatever. They have that. There's also a really good video called The History of StarTropics by Gaming Historian that I got most of, if not all of my development info on because there was nothing else about development anywhere online I could find about the development process of this game.
It's hard. I bet it's hard to find people who remember and or wrote down what happened to games developed in the 80s. Yeah,
they just don't. You didn't remember, didn't care, or they were also pushing them out so quick, that I bet you they didn't even. They're on to the next one. Not a big deal.
No one's gonna care about the story here of how this game was developed. Yeah,
no one cares about how we made palm trees. Okay, but the last resource I used is interesting because it's just StarTropics.com. If you go to StarTropics.com, you will see a website that looks like it's from 1995. Okay, but what's important is it has information on the first two games, as well as a fan-made version of StarTropics III. You can download an installer of that game. Now, did I download it? No, because I'm not brave enough, and I'm nervous about downloading weird files on the internet. But if you wanted to go for it, you could. If you wanted to, jump on that for us and try it, you're more than welcome to. I'm not encouraging you or discouraging you to, but apparently there's a fan-made version called StarTropics 3.
Wow. This is like Chex Quest. There was the first Chex Quest, there was a second one that they made, and then a third one that's a fan-made game too. So the fan-made third game is alive and well.
Yeah, so the reason that we're covering this, by the way, is Will on Discord brought up the idea of forgotten franchises, and then Burger Champ immediately mentioned StarTropics. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to look up StarTropics. And then that's when I had this sudden wave of memory rush over me. Remember looking at this cartridge as a kid and putting it in and barely remembering what was going on and kind of remembering the intro island. And the best thing about this now is you can play this on the Switch emulator that comes with Nintendo Switch Online. For the NES emulator. And so I actually have played the first two chapters of this. I'm on chapter 3 right now. And I gotta say, how you played this without creating suspend points in emulation, I mean, if you beat it without that, more power to you, because this game is hard. The first StarTropics is very hard. The first two chapters, you're like, oh, this isn't that bad, and then you get into chapter 3 and you're like, okay, I see this is punishing, because if you die, you go all the way at the start of the dungeon, and it can get very repetitive and annoying after a while. It's a test of endurance, if anything.
They kind of ease you back in.
Yeah, this game is super, super cool. Just the whole setting and what it's about, and there's a reason for that, and we're going to get into that right now. So the grime facts of StarTropics are: it was developed by Nintendo's R&D 3. It was released only in North America on December 1st, 1990, and then Europe 2 years later on August 20th, 1992. It is only on the Nintendo Entertainment System initially, and then it was put out onto the Wii Virtual Console, the Wii U Virtual Console, and now the NES emulator that comes with Nintendo Switch Online. I also believe if you bought one of those mini NESs, that had that StarTropics 1 is on that as well.
I think that is correct.
As far as number of copies sold, I have no numbers. I just know it sold well. It sold okay. It did fine. It wasn't record-breaking, but it sold enough copies to be profitable. The genre is action-adventure. In the September 1997 issue of Nintendo Power, they placed StarTropics at 64th place on their list of top 100 games of all time. Now, keep in mind, This was in 1997. Okay, this is before all the bangers came out, the ones that we all think of as
No
being the
Ocarina of
big
Time
ones.
on this list at all?
Yeah, so that was the only award or accolade or groundbreaking achievement I could find for this game. Average time to complete, according to HowLongToBeat.com, is 6.5 to 8 hours. There's no Metacritic score, but there is a game ranking score, and on game rankings, the first StarTropics got an 82.5%. So pretty good. Pretty good. Pretty well received.
Not bad, yeah.
So the story of the game is about Mike Jones, a star baseball pitcher. Mike Jones from Seattle, Washington. And no, I'm not just doing this because it's about the main character's named Mike and he lives in Seattle. That's just coincidence. Now, did it help? Of course it did, but we're just doing it that way. So Mike travels to visit his uncle, who is an archaeologist by the name of Dr. Stephen Jones, a.k.a. Dr. Jones, hint, hint, Indiana Jones, hint, hint.
Wow.
On the fictional Sea Island in the South Seas of the Pacific Ocean. Now, Sea Island is called Sea Island because it is shaped like a letter C.
Yep, okay. Makes sense.
And then in the tropical village of Corocola, he finds out that his uncle is missing, and then he has to go find his uncle. That's the whole story. You're looking for your uncle, which I think is actually, it's a better story than like find a princess in a castle.
Fight a princess.
Fight a princess. You know, the famous Mario story where you fight Princess Peach.
And at the end, like, everybody is hurt, and it's like, no, I said find a princess.
He's like, oh,
Mario's got black eyes, and like, yeah, it's just terrible.
It's just a terrible. But yeah, so the story is actually pretty cool that you're actually going to go find your uncle. Essentially, you're rescuing your uncle. It's a rescue mission. And throughout the way, you do all sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, I just got to the point where you just stopped. You were talking to dolphins just casually. You could talk to dolphins, you know,
Wow.
and help them out. So it's this weird mix of like science, but there's also some fantasy in here too, and magic items and stuff too. But it's that time, modern 1990 is how I would put it as far as the timeline goes with magic. So gameplay wise, if you have played Legend of Zelda on the NES, then guess what? You've kind of played StarTropics. That's, of course, a little bit of exaggeration, but it's not too far off. The game is divided into 8 chapters, and it's from a 2D top-down perspective in the overworld. And then when you go into a dungeon, the game switches mechanics. It's still 2D top-down, but it brings it in much closer, just like a Zelda dungeon. And it introduces various obstacles and enemies that you must fight, and you got to navigate through and solve, at least in the parts I've played, pretty simple puzzles. Like finding all the secrets in a dungeon is not nearly as hard as I feel like Zelda is, but still, that's there. Your weapon is a yo-yo.
Oh, that's
cool. Pretty cool. Yeah. And there's also a ton of unlockable weapons, like the going from like a torch to a baseball bat to a laser gun to a super laser gun. There's so many things to unlock. Fun fact, in the later versions of the game, on the Wii Virtual Console, the Wii U Virtual Console, and the Switch, the yo-yo is renamed to the Island Star because it turns out yo-yo is trademarked in Canada. Did you know that?
Well, today I learned.
Yeah, there you go. Don't try to put yo-yos in Canadian games. It's not cool.
Not without paying the Yo-Yo Corporation. That's what I assume they're called. Yo-Yo Corporation. Their fair cut.
Otherwise, you got to pay big yo-yo. You know?
Yeah, big yo-yo.
Paying big yo-yos, big no-no. Okay, so, all right. There's also non-combat items in the game. There's medicine, which is essentially a health potion that restores hearts back. Another magic item that I just ran into is the magic snowman doll, and that just like freezes all enemies in place. And it's actually very handy for the second boss, which is a giant octopus that you have to fight because you could freeze it and then just wail on it with a baseball bat.
That does sound useful.
That doesn't sound cool for a game. Like, to say that you wail on a giant octopus monster with a baseball bat, that should sell a game for you, I think.
So he's a pitcher, but he doesn't throw baseballs at things? He hits them with the baseball bat?
You do throw other items, like the torches you throw.
Okay.
So that it's like a ranged weapon. I haven't gotten that far into the game, but from what I'm read, like the weapons, from the pattern that I'm seeing in the game, is each dungeon gives you a new weapon. It's not like you collect all the weapons and have everything at your disposal. It's like each dungeon gives you one new weapon that you can use. So the first dungeon, I got to use the torches, which threw fireballs in front of you. The second dungeon was a baseball bat, which kind of attacks in a circle around you, much like Link's circular sword move, you know? And I imagine each dungeon's like that, where you get a new item, but you don't have the old ones. which is
okay. So it kind of replaces.
It's kind of but you always have the island star, the yo-yo. You always have that as a backup. Because the other ones have like ammo counters on them. You can only swing the baseball bat 50 times. So in my mind, he's just got 50 baseball bats in a backpack and he just uses it and it breaks every time he uses it. He's got to grab a new one. That just makes sense, you know?
Pioneering weapon durability.
Yeah, this is
back in the 90s.
I think it's safe to say that StarTropics is why we have Breath of the Wild. No.
Yeah.
All right, so enemies drop stars in dungeons. If you get 5 stars, you get 1 heart back. A fun story. The game is super hard, and you rarely get 5 stars before you die. This is my experience. Stars are not dropped often.
Not every enemy drops it. They just kind of occasionally drop. Okay.
It appears to be random and it's very difficult. But so you really want to go find that potion that's in each dungeon because that potion is good to pop before the boss. So usually my pro tip is you fight through the dungeon and then you get that potion. And then before you get to the boss room is when you create your save point, your emulation suspend point. And then that's when you go in and knock your head against the boss a couple times to see if you can beat him. So here is hands down the coolest thing about StarTropics. And it's the thing that Tyler mentioned off air right when I mentioned StarTropics. And that is the letter. That's right. This game came with a physical letter in the packaging. And that letter was from your Uncle Jones. And it said, or Uncle Steve, I guess is why they put it in there. So players get a special code on that letter. And in order to get that special code, you have to dip the letter in water to reveal the code on the paper, the physical paper. And you get that message in game. So in game, it's like your uncle says to dip the letter he gave you in water. And so in real life, you have to dip this letter in water and it says the code 747, which is a nod to Boeing, which is the airplane company that's here in Seattle. Because they're doing, so that code was only in people that bought physical copies of the game. If you got this game from a friend or rented this game from a Blockbuster, for example.
Or pirated it. NES piracy exist in large numbers in 1990? I don't know.
I mean, I think companies were making like pirated copies of games.
Yeah, like
for
you bought
mass
a cheap
production
version of it at the flea market or something.
Yeah, exactly. But so a couple people think that this was either there to prevent piracy or to stall the rental market, because it kind of sucks when you think about it. You get it to a certain point in this game, and they're like, dip the letter. And if you just rented the game from Blockbuster, you wouldn't, like, what letter? There is no letter.
So were they hoping you would know that means, it must have come with a letter, therefore I should go buy this game? Or were they hoping you would hear about it beforehand and then wouldn't rent the game in general? Like, what? I feel like the damage has already been done by the time somebody figures this thing out, and then you're just making them mad. Exactly.
And this question was the number one call the Nintendo helpline got.
Wow.
For StarTropics. Was like, whenever they got a call about StarTropics, they're like, the code 747. Like, they just knew.
That's how they answered the phone. It's like, thank you for calling the StarTropics helpline. The code is 747.
Yep, pretty much. I think so. The code was eventually published in Nintendo Power to help players that threw away their letter because they found out, like, this was a mistake. Like, we did this and didn't tell people that this letter is actually important. In the Wii U version of the game for the Wii U console, you can actually have a digital letter that shows a little letter they're dipping in a bucket, and then it just says above it 747 megahertz. So you know what to do. Cool. Fun fact: the Switch release does not include that. Apparently.
Wow, so
you just gotta Google it, or you gotta be like me and look up a bunch of stuff about this game before you start playing it, and then you just type 747 in. So some people think anti-piracy, some people think anti-rentals. Regardless, I do think it's really cool that they have like a prop you need in the game in real life.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
I'm hoping Nintendo just was going for that and didn't even, but they had to have thought about like anti-piracy and anti-rentals for this. So I just thought that was cool. And it's definitely what this game is most known for, I would say. Like that's what people recognize this game for, is this letter situation. And that's exactly what you said, the first thing I mentioned when I mentioned them doing StarTropics. So there you go. All right. So let's get into development for StarTropics, the first one. So StarTropics originated from the mind of Genyo Takeda. And is it Genyo or Genyo? It's Genyo Takeda.
Right, Genyo.
Genyo Takeda, yeah. who had previously created the Punch-Out series. And Takeda appreciated the Western market more than his peers and wanted to make a game specifically for North America. So this was one of the first times a game was made by Nintendo that was like, we are targeting American audiences. And that is why everything in StarTropics is related to American culture. The character's name, Mike, is the most popular name for a child in 1990. Jones is the fourth most popular last name in 1990, and also an Indiana Jones nod, so you got a 2 for there. Mike loves baseball, which is America's favorite pastime. I put that in quotes because some people disagree. But before I get a bunch of emails, yes, I also recognize that the yo-yo and baseball bat are also weapons from the Earthbound and Mother series of games. Okay, I want to mention that before I gloss over this, and I realize that this should definitely be in the Forgotten Game series. I think we can all agree that Mother and Earthbound qualify for that, so we'll get there. I promise you. I promise you we'll get there, team. All right, do you know a lot about Earthbound?
Do what?
Do you know a lot about Earthbound?
No, I don't know a ton about it. I don't know if I would consider it forgotten. Like, people talk about it all the time, but it hasn't had a new game in a long time, if that's what we're thinking of forgotten. It hasn't had a new entry.
I think that's what we're kind of talking about, is that it hasn't had it in a while. So it's like, because it's been, I mean, years, you know, and I know people are like,
yeah, it's been a long time.
Mother is the greatest game of all time. So, you know, you got that kind of thing going on. So I just want to let people know that I'm not glossing over the fact that they picked those like yo-yo and stuff as American things when they're also in Earthbound and Mother. It's true. I agree with you. We'll cover that. I just saw what they said on the Discord, what Will and Burger Champ were talking about, and I'm like, this is great. And then I started playing the game because it was on Nintendo Switch, and I'm like, this is just such a really delightful game. Another delightful thing about it that's a lot about American culture, everything on the island ends in the word cola, because cola is a popular beverage in the U.S. And I think that's what I love most about this game, is it's what's big in America, but also what people from other countries think is big in America, and that makes it great.
Oh,
you know?
That reminds me of the fighting baseball game where there's like a team that's from America and it's full of names of people that are just very close to like English American names, but like a little bit off. And it's just like, this must be what people in other countries hear when they hear these like stereotypical American names. And it's just really funny. Like, yeah, there's some really good ones in there.
And I think if you like that kind of stuff and you find that stuff funny like I do, and delightfully like like I guess the same way that people collect like old gas station signs from like the 50s, you know, as like a slice of Americana, I love weird cultural references to America that other people think are American, because it's just so funny to me that it's like, yeah, cola, sure, why not? Let's just throw cola in after every single word. It's great. I want to really talk about this too. The music in this game is awesome. If you haven't listened to the theme for StarTropics, I believe Burger Champ essentially went on a StarTropics tear on our Discord and put in-game music, the StarTropics theme. So I would listen to it there, or you could just YouTube StarTropics theme. It's really good, and it's very catchy. The only thing I would say about it is very overplayed in the game, because it's like the theme song. So whenever you're in the overworld, that song is playing, which like a lot of older Nintendo games can get old pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, because they really go for it on those like overworld themes. They're not like really about, there wasn't really ambient music in the NES days because of how like abrasive the sound hardware is in NES. So it was like everything went hard on what the song was, and it could get annoying after a while.
Yeah, it's definitely a good song. Yoshio Hirai is the one that composed that song and the music for StarTropics, and so props to Yoshio Hirai, and it's very good music, and I highly suggest you listen to it. Also, even the like dungeon themes and stuff, when it changes music, it's still pretty good. It's a very well-made game. I really enjoy it. And I also like that this, and I think from a history standpoint, why this game would be important is this was the first time, like I said, that Genyo Takeda was going specifically we're targeting American audiences with a game for the first time. Before this, it was always Japan first, and then we'll release it localized in other countries. And this was completely the opposite. This never came out in Japan, StarTropics. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, wow. It never even came out in Japan.
Nope. Never released in Japan. Just only released in North America, and then 2 years later in Europe. And it was a moderate success. And the game actually did get major love in Nintendo Power Volume 21. Front page issue, StarTropics, and a giant spread and walkthrough in the game. So it did get a lot of marketing push for it.
Nice.
But even before the first StarTropics was released, Genyo Takeda was already working on a sequel, and that sequel was called Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics II. And it's weird because I just wrote it here realizing StarTropics, no space in between those words. But Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics II, all spaces between all words.
Oops, all spaces.
Oops, all spaces. Very strange. So let's do the grime facts for Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics II. It was developed once again by Nintendo R&D 3, and Genyo Takeda was the director, taking charge, writing, producing, doing all that stuff. Release date, NES only in North America on March 15th, 1994.
That's a
right.
late NES game.
Oh, yeah, you're very perceptive, Tyler. It is one of the last games released exclusively on the NES. In the video for Gaming Historian, they say that it was the last one that was exclusively an NES game released on NES. And then in the Nintendo Wiki, it says that Wario Woods was actually released after this one as the last game exclusive on NES. But regardless, you are correct. It is very late as far as releasing only on NES, and there is no SNES port. It's just NES. That came out on March 15th, 1994. It then came out on the Wii U Virtual Console on December 29th, 2008 in North America, and then on September 3rd, 2015 for the Wii U Virtual Console. Oh, that was the Australia date. It actually didn't come out on the Wii U Virtual Console in North America until May 26, 2016. So pretty late. And this one is not on the Nintendo Switch emulator. Yeah, I couldn't find it on there. Maybe I overlooked it because it says Zoda's Revenge StarTropics 2 instead of StarTropics. Like the cover of StarTropics 1 is very much StarTropics. You can tell. Mm-hmm. But the box art for Zoda's Revenge StarTropics 2 looks a little bit different. Okay. So the best way to play this, I would say, is probably if you had the Wii Virtual Console versions of it, but getting copies of both StarTropics 1 and StarTropics 2 for NES, they're very common. They are not rare. They should be under $10 if you were looking for a cartridge copy if you have an original NES. It's very doable, is what I'm saying, which is nice because a lot of times when we talk about these older games, it's not. But because StarTropics 1 and 2 were only released in the United States, they're pretty popular still and they're around. So that's good.
Nice.
Number of copies sold. Absolutely no clue about Zoda's Revenge. I couldn't find any sales data on it. No info at all. Once again, action adventure. Awards and accolades, I couldn't find anything. The average time to complete for this one is 6 to 7 hours, so it's a little bit shorter than the first game. The Metacritic score, there was none, but the average scores were between a 6 and an 8 out of 10 on most of the gaming sites at the time. And this is also the NES version. I did not look at the scores for the Wii U and the Virtual Console versions because they're essentially
it's all the same game, right?
Exactly. There's not a lot of differences, and they didn't even have a letter to worry about for this one. So this story begins with Mike Jones back in Seattle. Mike, oh gosh, we're going to do that every time, huh? Do you think they knew? They didn't know that. This was way early.
Yeah, this was way before.
Do you think that's why Mike Jones did this, though? Because of StarTropics?
You think he's a big StarTropics fan? Maybe.
Probably. Really into that weird alien time travel stories of Zoda's Revenge. So the story begins with Mike Jones actually getting a telepathic message from Mika, who is the princess of the Argonians, who, spoilers, you rescue in the first StarTropics game. That's right. Aliens are coming into this.
Wait, are they like the lizards from Elder Scrolls? Aren't those Argonians?
Unfortunately, no.
That'd
be a cool crossover, though. Hey, Bethesda, look into crossovers with StarTropics. So, be like, this is the origins of Breath of the Wild. You need to do this, Bethesda. I'll send them a very heated letter that makes no sense. So she tells Mike how to solve a cipher that he and his uncle, Dr. J, Dr. Jones, found on the side of the Argonian space pod when they rescued them. And then in order to find to solve this cipher, they read it out loud, and it causes Mike to be flung through time into the past. And he starts in the Stone Age, and he has to find 6 tetrads. And once he gets all the tetrads, he can find out the mystery of this. Ooh, very spooky, very mysterious. Fun fact, tetrads, straight up just Tetris pieces from Nintendo's game Tetris. They just look
just like
the
different
same.
shaped Tetris pieces?
Yep. Totally. Exactly.
Wow.
That's what the tetrads are. So that's the plot of this one. You got to find the 6 tetrads throughout time. And Zoda's Revenge actually runs through 9 chapters instead of the 8 chapters like the first StarTropics game did. And while the original StarTropics took place almost entirely in this tropical archipelago, hopping between islands, Zoda's Revenge takes place through time and space. So you go to the Stone Age, you go to ancient Egypt, the Wild West, the Middle Ages, Victorian England. You go all over the place. And because Mike goes through time, you also get to meet a bunch of historical figures, both real and fictional. Okay, Cleopatra, Merlin, Sherlock Holmes, Leonardo da Vinci, King Arthur. It's like the weirdest Bill and Ted band ever. Yes. And those characters help you achieve your goal in finding the tetrads. And so they actually are just named blocks on the Virtual Console release. So there is a small change on the Virtual Console release. They call them blocks instead of tetrads. And you have to defeat Zoda's 3 clones as well. So the big gameplay changes here, though, is that Mike no longer only moves up, down, left, and right, like in the first StarTropics game. You can only move on a grid. Now you can move diagonally as well. So there's 8 different directions of movement, and you can change those directions in midair, which makes things very crazy and very hectic. You have an axe as your main weapon, but you also get Cleopatra's bronze dagger, Leonardo da Vinci's katana, because we all know that Leonardo da Vinci had a katana. Everyone knows that. Also, you get an upgradable projectile magic weapon, a magic attack that you learn from Merlin called the Psychic Shockwave. And that Psychic Shockwave is upgradable and based on how much health you have, is how much damage. The more health you have, the more damage it does. So if you use it when your guy is kind of wounded, it's not going to do as much stuff, you know? Mm-hmm. So, and the psychic weapon is the only one affected by the number of heart containers you have. It doesn't matter for other attacks. Enemy behavior has also changed. Enemies actually react differently depending on which weapon you're using, which is kind of cool.
That's
so
neat.
which is kind of cool for when you think early NES game, you wouldn't think they would be doing stuff like that, but they totally were. Also, there are a couple problems with the gameplay. First, changing directions in midair, like I said before, while a cool feature, you can really whiff these jumps. It's very easy to mess up a jump. And when you mess up a jump in this game, it's just like an instant death. It's not like oh no. You know how in what game was I playing recently? I was playing a game recently. It might be in Jedi Fallen Order also. Oh, and Force Unleashed too, actually. When you miss a jump in that game, instead of killing you, it just puts you right back to where you were. And I love that. I think that's a big thing for a platformer. Just do that. I made a mistake. Don't punish me for like a minute while you reload a save. Okay? This game does not believe in that. It will punish you no matter what if you miss a jump. And that's both for StarTropics 1 and StarTropics 2. But so midair jumping, while cool and while you can like have more control over your jump, can cause you to miss a lot. Also, and this is something I personally never really thought about when playing a game, but I now realize is like a must in older action adventure games. Like when I think about older NES games, this was a feature in there that I didn't understand why it was in there, and now it makes sense. StarTropics II gets rid of the brief period of invincibility after you've been hit. So when you get hit in a video game, your character usually flashes in these older games, showing that you're invincible for a second, after you get hit. And it's done to prevent an enemy from just stun locking you into dying. And StarTropics 2, for some reason, they just don't have that. Wow. So you can get like stun locked by a tiny enemy that takes away half a heart, and you can just get stuck in tight quarters and get killed that way.
Wow.
Yeah, and it feels pretty bad. So those are the two flaws. Those were mentioned by Gaming Historian, and I thought that was pretty interesting because I never even thought about why they had that invisibility thing, but it's so you can have a little bit of time to move out of the way so you don't get stuck. So it's cool. So the first big change that Takeda made with StarTropics 2 was to add 2 new writers. We're talking about the development here now. And he actually hired 2 writers from Nintendo of America because it's an American game. You might as well get some American writers, right, to fill it in. So George Sinfield and Brian Ulrich were the 2 screenwriters hired, and Takeda also was a screenwriter as well. So the 3 of them worked together. And they not only did this to bring that American game with American writers, but in general, Takeda wanted to actually bring Nintendo of America into the fold more. Like, once again, now we're talking about how Takeda really wants to bring in the West and help them produce games. This is kind of like he's extending an olive branch, if you will, for them to work together, which I thought was cool. Nice. Yeah. So StarTropics 1 and 2 is not just significant for those cool and interesting games, but they are significant because this is a time in Nintendo history where we're starting to see certain people at Nintendo realize the importance of bringing in a Western audience. Now, does everyone at Nintendo agree with this? Most likely not at this time, but this is where we're starting to see it, and I think that's why it's important. So they had meetings in Japan to determine the story of StarTropics and what they wanted to do, and they actually were almost going to go in a straight-up Indiana Jones ripoff direction, where Mike and Dr. Jones just go on an adventure together, like all over the world and globetrot. And in the end, they decided to go with this time travel plot instead, and I think it turned out pretty well. Like, the writing in the game is noticeably better. The characters are more fleshed out. Like, the dialogue in StarTropics 1, it's like each character has a line of dialogue. You walk up to them, they say the same thing over and over again. It's not like that as much in StarTropics 2. They try to crack jokes in StarTropics 2. Overall, it's just a lot more fleshed out. And because they're traveling through time, the settings change. The StarTropics 1 setting, while it's gorgeous and very colorful, it's an island the whole time. You're on islands. They never really changes the look of it. And because you're traveling through time in different, like the Stone Age and ancient Egypt and the Wild West, like it's just mixed up quite a bit more, and it's nice that way. So that's the first two StarTropics games. So why are these games forgotten? Well, it's hard to say. We can only speculate, but here are the theories that we have. First and foremost, as Tyler noticed, Zoda's Revenge was released as one of the last, if not the last, exclusive new titles on the Nintendo Entertainment System, releasing in 1994, 4 years after the original StarTropics.
Very late in the game. I think Wario's Woods was the last one, but it also came out on Super Nintendo.
Oh, see, so this was the exclusive NES title, yeah. And that's something that's interesting, is like this time period, this is 1994. Most people had moved on to the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis at this point. So Zoda's Revenge, probably not going to do well sales-wise because it's on an old game, old dated console. You know, that's the problem. The second reason why I think this game was forgotten and the series was forgotten is the title, Zoda's Revenge StarTropics II, might have thrown some folks off. Like, you don't meet Zoda until the very end of StarTropics 1, and if you didn't get that far or didn't play the first StarTropics, you'd have no idea what's going on.
What the heck? Who's Zoda?
Exactly. You're like, I mean, I think they would have been better off just calling it StarTropics 2. That would have been a better reason. And then just bring Zoda back as a connection in. Don't even mention Zoda in the title. Make it a little less confusing. The third, and I think the biggest reason why we haven't seen a new StarTropics is after Zoda's Revenge, Genyo Takeda actually went back to exclusively working on hardware for Nintendo. He actually became his title was Technical Fellow of Hardware. So he essentially ran everything involving hardware at Nintendo, and he actually worked there up until pretty recently. He recently retired. I want to say in the last 3 or 4 years he retired from Nintendo. Yeah, so he had been there this whole time, but working on hardware. And I think because this was his baby, this was his game, they just kind of shelved it. You know?
Yeah.
And on top of that, and maybe the sequel having kind of lackluster sales, being the last game on the NES, and in Nintendo's mind, I'm like, you kind of already have a top-down RPG that everyone loves. It's Zelda. You know, you don't need a StarTropics, so it's easy to shelve and easily to forget about. So that's why I think this game was forgotten. So that is StarTropics 1 and 2, and I like this forgotten games thing. I think it could be a cool idea. I think there's other franchises out there that have been forgotten.
Yes, definitely.
I mentioned Earthbound and Mother. They're forgotten as in we haven't seen new stuff, but they're definitely not forgotten. They're very popular among people. But there's got to be some other games. I was thinking about one that I think we could talk about, and this is an idea. I have Wave Race.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I missed, Wave Race was huge on Nintendo 64, and I know there was a GameCube Wave Race.
And there was a Game Boy Wave Race. In fact, the first Wave Race was on Game Boy.
Oh, really? Yep. So there's Game Boy, and there's Game Boy, N64, and then GameCube. Okay, so Wave Race would be a good one, because I loved Wave Race.
Yeah, I love that the second or the third Wave Race, I guess the one on GameCube, had characters from 1080 Snowboarding in it. Maybe the one on Nintendo 64 did also, but I think then I guess I would make them Wave Race characters because they would have come out on that game first. But I love that. I just love characters from one game being in like another game. EA did that a little bit with some of their big sports games, like some of the characters from the first SSX game are in this like snowmobiling racing game too. I think that's cool.
On the topic of characters and other things, there is a large sector of diehard Nintendo fans that don't understand why Mike Jones is not a Super Smash Bros. Character. And I confused myself thinking he was a character. He's not. And then I looked it up to confirm or deny if I was correct or not. And I got even more confused because there are fan sites where they've given him stats and moves already.
Oh,
it's not
wow.
real. They just have made a whole move set for this imaginary Smash Brothers character that doesn't exist. And even like fan art to have like as the character art for it. And I think it's a good idea. I mean, we've seen like Smash Brothers is kind of where they bring back old weird Nintendo stuff like Mr. Game & Watch. Mm-hmm. So I could see Mike Jones coming in there with a baseball bat and yo-yo. Although again, we already got characters with baseball bats and yo-yos, I think, in Super Smash Brothers in Earthbound characters. So it would be interesting to see. And I think people might even people that don't know might even just be like, oh, he's just another Earthbound character.
Yeah, maybe. And Earthbound has a similar sort of theme going on with it where it's like a Japanese made game that is like, this is what we think America is like, or like this is us like making an American game, like a similar kind of idea as StarTropics.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's StarTropics. I really hope they do something with this. I think it would be kind of cool to. It could get the Nintendo remake treatment, you know, or reboot even, where they just not even remake the game with new graphics like they did, say for Zelda Link's Awakening, but even just reboot it, like do the original story, but make it longer and better and, you know, modern. I think that would be really cool, and I think people would dig it because it is a very neat idea. And also just. We're at the time period. It's 2020. 90s nostalgia is in full effect. They could totally pull that off. You know, if they made it super 90s, like had them listening to like 90s music or whatever and all that stuff, that'd be fun. But that's StarTropics. I'm super stoked about it. I thank the people on Discord that mentioned it because I have been playing it actually on my Switch and I intend to try to beat it because once you have, I mean, I'm just setting save points all over the place. But for now, Tyler, what you been playing?
This week, I've been playing Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. I finished it this morning, in fact. I'm recording this on Sunday, so I finished it this morning, and I subsequently re-upped my subscription to Final Fantasy XIV. I'm back in it, and I'm getting caught up on all the story stuff that's happened between now and the end of Shadowbringers, because that's when I quit playing, was before the first major patch of Shadowbringers. So that's most of what I've been playing this week. I do have a funny observation that was shared with me about Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. And so a lot of Ratchet & Clank games have sort of like innuendo in their titles, right? Like the second one is called Going Commando. Third one is Up Your Arsenal. The one on PSP was called Size Matters. So they have a history of like some sort of innuendo title. But they haven't really done that in a little while. Like A Crack in Time is like, okay, maybe you could come up with something for that, but they really haven't had anything beyond that. But somebody pointed out to me that the new one is called Rift Apart, and if you switch the F and the P, you get Ripped Apart, and I love it. And
that's
now
true.
I have a hard time not saying that when I'm talking about Rift Apart, and so that's just funny. I just think it's funny.
Even though we're a clean podcast, I think you can say Ripped Apart on here. I'm not going to censor that.
I think you can.
I think that's just good old-fashioned fun, you know?
Yep.
Just classic potty humor.
That's
Never
right.
gets old.
Butts are funny. Butts are funny. Known fact. Yep.
Well, I finally beat Borderlands 3 this week. That is
nice.
done.
Finally, that one's been on your list for a while.
Oh my gosh. It didn't even take me that long either. I was actually having fun doing it, and I was kind of getting into the story in the end. It just took me that long to get into it. Like, the story didn't really pick up until like chapter 17.
Dang.
So, yeah, it took a little bit for me. But it was still fun. I had a good time, and I don't think it's a bad game at all. I think playing it by yourself is not what it's intended.
Mm-hmm.
So I played that. I played some Sea of Thieves. I played that Pirate's Life.
Oh, yeah, I hear that's pretty cool.
And it is like playing through the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, but that's fine. I didn't mind it. My friends thought it was kind of boring, but I was like, hey, you know, it was a thing we did. And then we tried to play the multiplayer game Sea of Thieves and like do the fun island hopping chores, and we got all our chests, and then someone came along and murdered us with like all the high-end cosmetic items. Like, they've been playing this game forever. Yeah, it was not fun. It was not a fun time. So other than that, though, I have been playing StarTropics. I'm into it. Still kind of taking a break from Smash Brothers Ultimate. I unlocked some more characters, but then I was like, I think I'm going to take a little breather for now.
Like how you're still unlocking characters in that game.
There are so many characters in that game. It never ends, dude. It's nuts. And then if I wanted to, once I hit the end, I could try to unlock more. And I'm like, I'm not going to get the DLC. So this is too many characters, Too many characters. I don't regret buying it, but I definitely am not as into it as I used to be. I bought it for the party online sake with Discord people. And when we do that, it's fun. But yeah, I'm playing that. And then I also, during the Steam Summer Sale, I bought all the Far Cry games. That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Every single one. So I have every single Far Cry game. I started playing Far Cry 1, and oof, it is rough.
Yeah, it has not aged well.
No, and I beat the first mission, and I got onto the second mission in the container ship, and I'm like, you know what? I think I got my experience. It didn't even put it on the Trello board. It didn't even make it on there. It's like, no, I'm not going to get it on there.
It was a tech demo. It was like the graphics were so cool in 2004 and the draw distance was incredible. And the water was like, nobody had ever seen water like that before. But otherwise, it's not a great game.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to skip ahead from, I might even skip Far Cry 2, which I know is a good one. But I'm going to skip to, I've already beaten Far Cry 3, but I'm going to skip to Far Cry Primal, I think. Because that one sounded like really different to me. And then after that, I'll go back to 4, and then I'll do 5. So, but yeah, I like the Far Cry games. There's one of those game series that I play a Far Cry game, and then I stop, and I don't play another one for a while. So I'm sure I'll play like Primal, and then I won't get around to the other ones until like a year or two from now. But that's totally fine. They're fun games, and they were pretty cheap on the Steam Summer Sale. And I've heard Far Cry 5 has co-op, which I want to play with you, Tyler.
Ooh, I do have it, so we might be able to do that one.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun. I think you can play that whole game in co-op. Which is
yeah, and they have separate storylines, right? So I don't need to like play. I played the first Far Cry. I haven't played any of them since.
Yeah, they're all separate storylines. So cool. I played Far Cry 3. I've played that one, and that was really good. And some say that's the best one still. Like they've been trying to kind of match that Far Cry 3 storyline, and they just haven't hit it yet, but I still think they look cool, and I'm into it, and I just like the gameplay, so it is fun. So I got those, and I look forward to those. But if you were a diehard StarTropics fan and you have StarTropics memories, I would like to hear about them, and you can email us those memories at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We would like to hear your story, or you could tweet at us at @mecoletta or at SneakerElf on Twitter. But we do have some emails to read. Do you want to read some emails?
Sure.
So this first email is from Jimmy from Sweden. Ooh, Sweden. This is neat. So I'll read it. It's called Goals and Habits is the subject line. It goes, "Hello, Mike and Tyler. I just wanted to talk about a bit of gaming habits and backlogs. Ever since I grew up and gained more responsibilities, I've been kind of bad at actually finishing games." I 100% agree with this sentiment, and I see you're seen, and we want to let you know this is a problem for everyone. I probably ended up beating about 5 games a year. I started playing a lot more, but to be honest, I often stopped playing most games after an hour or so. Then when 2020 came around, I made a challenge/goal for myself. I'm going to beat 20 games in 2020. I actually succeeded in beating 21 games. Oh, nice. Congratulations. It felt so much more rewarding to actually beat games before moving on to the new ones. I wanted to continue this challenge this year, and my new goal is to just beat as many games as last year or more. So far, I have beaten 17 games in 2021, so you're off to a good start.
Your way.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on this? Maybe you've had your own goals at any point. Thanks again for the awesome podcast, Jimmy from Sweden. P.S. Here are the games I beat in 2020 and so far in 2021, respectively. They are also in order of how much I like them from best to worst. And he says we don't have to read all these on the show because it takes a lot of time. But what I want to do is I want to read his first 5 of each. Does that work? I think the first 5. So this is Jimmy's top 5 from 2020. All right.
And these aren't necessarily games that came out in 2020.
No, they can be any year, but these are one of the ones he beat in 2020. The top 5 games that he beat in 2020 are Dragon Quest XI S, which is on Switch, Super Mario Galaxy. Oh, yeah, that's a great game on Switch. Super Mario 64 on Switch, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Assassin's Creed Origins. I've heard Assassin's Creed Origins is good, and I never played it. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I should check that out. And then from 2021, the top 5 is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Ooh,
so good.
I never played it. I should get it.
You should.
Persona 5 Royal. Ooh. I know
also great.
Paper
I haven't
Mario.
played Royal, but
Paper Mario for N64. That's a good one. Rayman Legends Definitive Edition and new Pokemon Snap on Switch. I really want to play that new Pokemon Snap. You know, I've heard it's really good.
I've heard it's pretty good, yeah.
Rayman also is a game that I like, and I just haven't played it since I was a child, and it'd be good to play. But I am right now, like, I haven't bought Skyward Sword HD yet because I want to make sure I have the time to really be like, I'm buying it so this week I can play it all the way through, you know?
Yeah,
One of those games, because I really want to do that. But as far as our thoughts on this, Jimmy, we've made our own goals. Well, I mean, Tyler, I feel like you might be the king of video game goals because you're like, I'm going to play a whole series. You know, you beat all of COD.
Well, that's not true. I stopped playing COD. I did not get past... I beat up through the Modern Warfare series, and I have yet to play World at War. I took a break and haven't got back to them, but I should pick them back up.
But the point is you make the goals to do it, though. You're on the journey still. You haven't failed the journey.
That's true.
You and I, we beat all of Gears of War together. It's fun to do it with a person. Like, fun to do it with a friend. Like, Tyler and I beat all of Gears of War. That was really fun. Then we played through all the Halos. That was really fun. Like... I think these goals are awesome, and I think they're fun to do, especially if you're having a good time doing it, Jimmy, because that's what's important. But they're really fun when you get a friend to do it with. So I would that would be my suggestion: is you have a co-op game you haven't played yet, or a game that's single player but can be played in co-op. That's the money spot there, because then you're like, not only am I doing this thing and crossing it off my list, I'm also actively socializing with a friend. I forgot this. I played the co-op mode of Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle last Monday with a friend. I went to his house to play it. It's really fun. We played through the second two worlds, and it was really cool. He also has like all the weapons and characters maxed out, so because he's really into the game too. And so when I was playing on his system, we were just wreck and shop on normal mode, which felt really good because they still have the escort missions.
Oh.
Which is interesting. For escort missions, they're not my favorite. They're no one's favorite.
Yeah.
But they weren't that bad, which was fine. So, yeah, that was a fun thing to do, and I played that with him, and it helped him knock that off his list. So, this is great, Jimmy. I enjoy it. And thank you for the email. I appreciate it. Do you want to do the next one?
Yeah, we got an email I cannot speak today. An email here from Will. Will says, "Good evening, Mike and Tyler." Well, it's the late afternoon, so nice try. Will from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, not a real term here. After listening to some of the older episodes, I realized that you used to live near each other, or at least that's what it sounded like. I'm curious as to whether or not this pod was spur of the moment, years in the making, what the planning was like, etc. Tell us about the prehistory of codecs, and thanks for sticking with us 3 years later. It's something I look forward to, second only to Dan Carlin and Mike Duncan in the podcast world. Wow, right up there with Dan Carlin and Mike Duncan. Will from the Dallas made-up sociological term area. I think I feel like you're the expert on sort of the history here, because this was something you wanted to do, and you were going to do it by yourself, I think, right?
Yeah, and there is the episode that I have not yet had the courage to release. That's just me doing this, and I don't know if it will ever see the light of day. But yes, Tyler and I used to live near each other in the Los Angeles area, and I was trying to do this on my own, and I read all the book, and I was using Ultimate History video games, and I did an episode. And while the old podcast network we were on liked it, I didn't like it. And I didn't know if it was just me being alone. I thought it would be better to have someone in chemistry. And honestly, like, this is true, is I was listening to a lot of Stuff You Should Know at the time, the podcast Stuff You Should Know. And those two hosts have great chemistry. And I think that's what makes their show so great, is that they are good to each other and going back and forth with each other. And I was like, well, who am I really good friends with in LA that loves video games? Well, my dear friend Tyler. And then I was like, well, Tyler should do this with me. And you said yes, thankfully. And then it's good because you add credibility to this podcast.
Thanks.
And yeah, so that's just how it started, and I'm super happy with it. I'm happy that we it's 3 years. That's crazy.
Yeah,
think about it.
And we really haven't missed that many episodes.
I was looking. Weekly. We've missed 5 weeks. That's what we've missed. 5 weeks total. So, yeah, it's pretty great, and I'm really happy with how far it's gone. And yeah, that's pretty much the story. Is it wouldn't be here today if Tyler hadn't joined up. I think that's what makes it. Because, people compliment us on our chemistry a lot, Tyler.
That's true. I've heard that.
We also have been called painfully endearing.
Painfully endearing.
But yeah, that's how I started. Also, Dan Carlin does like 5-hour podcasts, and I am here to tell you we will never do that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
But he releases like a 5-hour or 6-hour podcast once every like 3 months, which is a better schedule.
So he could break it up a little bit maybe, but
yeah.
I'm sure he has.
You know what? I'm going to
whatever
call
he does
Dan
is
up.
the way to do it. Yeah,
Call Dan up. Because we all know each other, right? Yeah.
Hey, Dano. That's what we call him in the podcast world. We call him Dano.
Yeah, and he hates it. Let's talk about the history of you doing 6-hour podcasts. Why you do that? Why you doing that, Dan? Okay. But thank you, Will, for the email. Appreciate it. And it's been going great. 3 years. Woo. Okay. So the last email, and it says, "Heyo, long email is long." So here we go. "Hey guys, Spudweiser here. Like the beer with a potato. And yes, Mike, you can say my nickname. Just emailing you to tell you know that I love the podcast. Mike butchers Japanese." Well, I'm glad because this episode, I feel like I butchered it a little bit. But actually, in all seriousness, it is extremely hard to find a good podcast. So many of them are just someone reading from something they wrote. If I wanted that, I would purchase an audiobook. Your banter back and forth, as well as the amount of research you guys put into each episode, is refreshing. I drive a tractor trailer, and I love listening to you guys as I sit in gridlock. It makes my job way better. Well, thank you for that, Spudweiser. There is also a game for the N64 that I feel needs an honorable mention. Yeah, I know I am way late, and that game is Body Harvest.
Oh, I remember that game getting like advertised in Nintendo Power, and I was like, this is weird.
The game was developed by a little company called DMA Design, which became Rockstar North.
Oh.
Interesting. So this is what Spudweiser says about Body Harvest. "The game has one of the best, hot take, I'll fight you, opening scenes from any video game ever. The premise is this: the last of humanity lives on Station Omega floating above Earth. Over the last 100 years, aliens have invaded Earth and harvested the human population as a food source. These invasions happen every 25 years or so at different locations. Each invasion starts with the aliens constructing a shield generator that isolates the area from the rest of humanity, allowing the aliens to harvest at their own pace. The first attack took place in Greece during 1916. The second was Eastern Canada, cut from the game. And the third was the island of Java during World War II. The fourth was between Nevada and Arizona during 1966. And the last attack was 1991, Siberia. That's where I am going to leave you to avoid spoilers, but you have an evil twin, which I am sure it makes for an interesting Thanksgiving gathering." Ooh, that's good, yeah. So the game is basically Grand Theft Auto Light. As a matter of fact, there is a mission titled Body Harvest in GTA San Andreas, which is a throwback to this gem of a title. Oh, that's cool. There is close to 40 vehicles. It is hard to get an exact number that range from cars to military tanks, biplanes, helicopters, and even boats. It is also the first true open world, my own opinion and hot take, as each of the areas you can play on are open with some missions requiring you to use several different vehicles to complete. The game is also the hardest game I have ever played next to Dark Souls, as not only do you have to worry about yourself and health, but there is also a tracker for civilian deaths, and once that is full, the game is over. The thing is, that bar does not reset between stages, so your screw-ups follow you like a bad case of athlete's foot. This can become a big problem later on, as a harvester could spawn in and kill one civilian, and it is game over for you. It adds another dimension to the game that makes sense as you are trying to save humanity. Man, this game sounds really hard, Tyler.
Yeah.
The game also suffered from what Tyler lovingly referred to as the swoop and poop. Because Nintendo wants to be involved with every third-party game, the game went through several redesigns, as well as having some stages completely removed and the gore toned down before Nintendo would allow the title to ship. This, combined with language barrier and their eventual merger with Take-Two Interactive in 1999, stopped any further games from being developed by DMA for the Nintendo 64. This is a shame, as their other title, Space Station Silicon Valley, really did show their love for designing games on N64. Unfortunately, the game never made it onto any of the virtual consoles. This was rumored to be due to a feud between Rockstar and Nintendo over how Nintendo licensed games. Also, the game cannot be emulated, as you fall through the first bridge you have to walk across in Greece and drown. Anyway,
no.
I am sorry for the long email, but this game was near and dear to my childhood, but no one seems to have played it on other than my brother and I. I am hoping that maybe someone else out there has had as much fun as I did with this title. All the best, Spudweiser. P.S. Podcast producer Toby gives me motivation in life. The episode in which this shows up and destroys the desk are some of my favorites.
I have to kick him out now before we record, because otherwise he just shows up and rubs his face all over everything.
He's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm testing this microphone. Dad, testing the microphone."
Test.
Well, okay, so Body Harvest. This is interesting. I never heard of this game. Tyler remembers commercials for it. If you have played this game, you need to email us or on Discord say you have, so Spudweiser has someone to talk to about it. Because I feel like I just read a mini history of this game.
Yeah.
It seems very interesting. It's a forgotten title.
Yeah, that definitely qualifies as forgotten title, I think.
So this is a perfect email for today. So maybe we can look into Body Harvest a little more down the road, or at least look into what's going on with this weird Rockstar versus Nintendo feud and DMA design, which is interesting. But great email, Spudweiser. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's all the emails. If you want to send us an email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to join our Discord, you can get an invite either through email or you can find one on the Twitter profile, pinned at the top of my Twitter profile at Micoletta. There's an invite that never expires. With that, thank you so much for listening. And Tyler, would you like to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.